we got a couple of these already put out there. What kind of response or feedback or thoughts do you have so far with what we've been putting out there?
I think that I want to be careful with the SaaS. I mentioned that in email the other day because what Skunk 2 has um, is a long running. Well, I'm not going to put you on for too long, but there's not another one. There's not another dude in the industry like you, right? So you have a lot of racing experience. You have an R&D facility. Like the opportunity to elevate the brand, I think, is huge.
Yeah.
Where even if someone started today, they have to put their 20 or 30 years in to be the next Dave.
Yeah.
So I think that that's a huge kind of a spinal cord to the organization that we should respect and not be dogging out other dudes that may not be as good as you or may not may like if there's guys in the industry that are shady and they're liars and taking from people and giving them nothing. Well, yeah, I love calling those guys out. But the average guy, you know, he's just doing his best.
Yeah. No,
And
no, no, no. I understand what you're
so I
saying.
want to be a little bit kinder. Like when I said the internet's not a real place, that's actually a Dave Chappelle line. And when he puts it in context, it's beautiful because people really get turned out on what's happening on the internet, and the internet's not a real place. You know?
So we should have emphasized it more. That's not sass. That's just fact.
Yeah, yeah. I hear
Yeah,
you.
so you're the kinder, gentler Jays trying to like let off the gas when you're not even at full throttle.
Oh no, no, I'm not for public consumption at full throttle.
What about you, Jamie? Any thoughts? I have my thoughts. I'll share those after you guys are done.
The feedback's been good. Guys, I sent you a few screenshots here to send to Brandon and Jay of sparking some interest in the thoughts of other guys. You had a few BMW guys reach out about using cams, anything outside of stock. Straight six guys that they're chewing up the followers and they're really trying to reach and see if they can find some answers to some of these questions. And they're really tuned in. I
How are
mean,
they chewing up
Yeah.
followers on BMW? It's on rollers.
I'll dig back. I'll find the message and send it to you. This is an older guy. It's an E36. So I'm not sure what generation engine he's got in there, but the moral of the story is they're watching, across the board, not just Honda guys, not just Toyota guys, not just Nissan guys. They're really watching and they're tuned in, they're intrigued, and they want to learn more. So
Yeah.
my inbox is flooded with guys asking a bunch of questions, and maybe another episode is kind of going through those DMs, and maybe we can start answering some of those questions through some of these episodes. Because I
Yeah.
probably have a good 20 to 30 questions in my inbox.
When you think about this, Jamie, you think about the opportunity to have multiple styles of dynos and multiple engines at play. Like think about like what Skunk 2 is to the Honda community, and then you mentioned that BMW guy. I
Like,
mean, those are neat engines, and they don't have a brand like this in their community. So like there's a lot of work to be done. A lot
Sure.
of work to be done.
I think I think we're in a time period where I'm seeing a lot of educational content starting to pop up, and it's a little bit more serious, with a little bit more math and detailed descriptions on all the science behind it. I'm seeing that. Unfortunately, a lot of those channels are probably only getting like 5,000 views, 10,000 views. So, like, if we can put out good information and we're pumping 50, 60,000 views at a time, then we have a good platform to at least get the information out. Whether it's how it's received, I don't know. Like, my
Yeah.
point isn't to mock end users. That's hardly my point. It's to educate them so they can understand a little bit better.
No, I dig it. I think this could turn into a huge deal because there's not the experience just in these three, and then maybe there's another player that enters, and maybe next year there's a different panel, and this whole product can keep evolving and be really useful to a community.
Yeah. So my takeaway looking at the last few episodes is like, when you're in like middle school science class and the first time you touch a microscope, like everybody's like, hey, look at the whatever. And everybody thinks they're seeing the same thing. And one person's focused on the dust and one person's focused on the amoeba. One person's like so out of focus, he's just looking at clouds. I almost
Right.
feel like our discussions is like we're looking at the same thing, but we're zoomed in at different levels.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna. It's like the three blind guys that touched the elephant. We're all talking elephant, but we're describing different things.
It's because you grabbed this trunk.
Yeah.
It's
So
not his trunk.
What did he say?
let's put lift and duration as our center point. If we go this way in the discussion, we talk about end user use case. And then over here, we have like design optimization. And there's kind of like two directions that we can go in, right? So like I keep tending to go this way, but it's too fine at this point, right? So I think we need to go back in this direction and say, helping people understand lift and duration and just valve events. I mean, if we're going to talk about it, it's valve events. When do valve events occur?
Yep.
That's my thought. So whatever direction you guys want to steer it in,
I think that you should use your cutaway B and go through a combustion cycle.
Okay.
That's simple.
Let's go into that end user use case direction, and that will help us understand what's going on with the engines and when valve events happen within an engine.
Well, we start with the 4 strokes. I mean, that's something that I think is as basic as I don't think we're going to go any more basic than that, but just talking through the 4 cycles in combustion.
4 cycles is what? It's a suck, squish,
bang, and blow.
Bang, and blow. There's your 4 cycles. Here, I will run it through at 2 times the speed, and then when we get into it, we can just slow it down.
Yeah, we picked the engine that spins counterclockwise. You're gonna have somebody in the comments complaining.
So I indicated things like ignition, like where the ignition typically starts, where the peak cylinder pressure is at, the maximum piston speed locations, And then on this, we can see where the intake valves open and close. You can see that on the non-VTEC rotations, the valves they don't even have any overlap or minimal overlap. And then in VTEC, they have significant overlap. And it's all indicated there. Eventually, we'll put this graphic up as just a graphic that people can look at on Instagram or YouTube or whatever and watch it however many times they need to watch it.
Awesome. Okay, so let's walk through the intake stroke.
Intake stroke. Okay, let's go to... I'll just start it from the beginning. So it looks like it starts on the power stroke, right? Power. Let's start on the intake stroke. Kind of neat, huh? You see the exhaust gas, the intake gas. Starting with the intake stroke. So you can see here the exhaust closes at 30 degrees after top dead center, and the intake's already moving, so it should say intake open here.
So let's talk about how many degrees there are in that intake stroke.
The intake stroke each stroke is only 180 degrees.
Just key information for the users, right? The users they're just looking at this as they don't know what they know the 4 strokes as we just defined them, but they don't know the details like that. How many degrees there are in each?
Well, each stroke is 180 degrees, right? So top to bottom is 180 degrees, bottom to top is 180 degrees. Full rotation is 360. We know that. And then a total number of 720 degrees to encapsulate 4 of the 180 strokes.
Perfect.
Right. So if that's the summary. But the effective intake stroke actually, we can look here when this B VTEC cam starts to close. Okay, why don't we start with overlap, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can see here at 30 degrees before top dead center, the intake cam already starting to come off the seat. This is a B series VTEC cam, right? So 30 degrees top dead center. Before top dead center, the intake valve is coming off the seat. And then overlap period is when both valves are open.
And that's another term that we have to talk about, overlap.
Yeah, just the subject of what's happening during overlap inside of the cylinder is really neat.
Yeah, so overlap is basically when both the intake valve and the exhaust valve are open. It gives the intake valve a little bit of a head start, and then the exhaust signal, helps start the intake charge. Because the exhaust flowing out creates this big negative. It creates a negative depression in the cylinder side, right? Just creating almost like a vacuum that starts the intake charge pulling in.
Then we can also touch on overlap as it applies to a naturally aspirated setup and a turbo setup, where overlap can hurt in some cases and help in others. It's probably a good talking point.
Yeah, that's use specific. Like a turbo shouldn't need as much overlap because the air is being pushed in.
Correct.
Right? We're not relying on the natural cycles of the engine to create the inertia and the momentum. We actually have something pushing behind it.
And there's pressure ratio involved. If you're upside down on turbo and you got 80 pounds of back pressure for 40 pounds of boost,
right,
during that overlap is a different scenario to the next cycle as far as charge cleanliness.
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, Jay, how much overlap do you run on your turbo stuff?
I'd have to, if I pull the number out of my head, I'd be pulling it out of my head.
Yeah.
I'm so simple. I grab one of two sets of camshafts.
Yeah.
And I just get the results because they want 1,000 horsepower, or they want 1,500 horsepower, and you're just operating the engine at different pressure ratios. So the JZ cam game is pretty simple. You get a set of cams from Brian, and you get 272s if you're a drifter, and you get 276s if you're a dyno guy or a drag racer. And because you're so out of cylinder head, the engines still go to 10,000 with pride anyway. So you're just kind of there. What we've been talking about, not to get too far off topic, but is getting a set of cams that are better than what's on the market, in production, which would be able to optimize the lift and try to cover up for the poor cylinder head. I could grab a cam card if you want me to grab a cam card, but I don't have the numbers in my head.
Well, let's say, so you said it was a 272?
272 is what the drifters are kind of married to, and the 276s are what the dyno guys and the drag racers are married to.
And that's at what checking height?
At 50, 234, 238. Center line is 110, 118. Intake opens at 7, closes at 47. Exhaust opens at 57, closes at 1.
7 and 47.
These are opens at 7, closes at 47, and these are your 50 numbers?
Yes.
Okay, and then and what was the other one?
Exhaust opens at 57, closes at 1. And the 50 is 50 thousandths of lift. So we have to go through and kind of describe what that 50 or 20 or whatever that number is, so our viewers can make sense of it.
All right, so let's see. We have...
So 110, 118 center?
Yep.
This is... What did we say the first checking height was?
We have duration numbers at 50 thousandths.
Yeah, but the 272 and 276 are from...
Oh, 272 and 276.
At... Oh, they don't tell you at?
No, it's just advertised.
Okay. Advertised. Maybe first thing we talk about is what is advertised duration.
Well, let's finish the combustion cycles first. You have the four cycles that make it a four-stroke engine, and there's a pressure ratio or a depression in the cylinder that's helping fill the cylinder, and there's overlap, which for our VTEC crowd, it's very present when you're on a set of delete cams that don't have the crossover, and they're just trying to run the engine on the big cam all the time. And for the domestic guys, they just want the poor idle quality that comes with it. So you kind of get stuck with it. But um, from there, I think after you move through the cycles of the engine, you can then start to talk about your defining lift, defining duration, what what the difference is between a camshaft that has a lot of advertised duration and not a lot of duration at 50 versus a camshaft that has a lot of advertised duration and reasonably big duration at 50. Um, how when you're looking at camshafts and you're moving between manufacturers, if you're not looking at that at 50 number and it's an at 20 number, you've got to be aware of that, because then you're not comparing, you know, um, camshafts, and whether or not you're looking at lobe lift versus valve lift, if it's a rocker or follower system versus a bucket system, where the cam's directly actuating the valve. There's a lot of, um, one of the things when I had my old company is I didn't get into this subject because it was such a mammoth subject to cover. You know,
Yeah.
there's so many things that you have to really go through when you're discussing um, valve train. That's why I was mentioning before, it sure would be nice to call and say, like, sell me what I need. This is my goal. Sell me what I need, which I think is a lot of how the market works. But if we're going to try to educate the market, man, there's a lot of information to cover.
The 272, 276, is that an intake duration, exhaust duration, or is it 272, 272 is one combo, 276, 276 is another combo?
These are not split advertised duration. So they're both 276 on
Okay.
one set of cams and both 272s on another set of cams. However, the duration at 50 is different between the two cams.
Let's do a 270. I'm just going to use the 276 advertised and then 238 at 50. And then I got timing numbers of 740. Well, 747 is the 234 number. And then
Yep.
57.1 is the 238 number.
Yes.
Which cam does that map to?
Well, the exhaust cam is 238 duration at 50, whereas the intake cam is 234 duration at 50. They're both
Oh, okay.
advertised as 276.
Oh, I see. So they're both 276 cams, but the intake is 234 at 50 and the exhaust is 238 at 50.
Yes, sir.
All right. 57. I think it's easier to start explaining it in 2D. What do you think?
Sure.
Well, there's some turbo sizing that you have to respect. If a guy's going to have a 6466 on a JZ and he's going to make, say, 800 wheel, um, there's no real, it doesn't make sense in my mind to use the larger profile cam, because he wants to be in at 4,000 and he's done just over 8,000. Whereas the 276 customer, he may have a 80 millimeter turbine versus that 66 millimeter turbine. He's going to have a lot more gas flow and the potential to rev the engine up and run more boost. And he's going to run that larger camshaft, because the 30 horsepower he may lose at, 4,000 RPM, he'll take that 30 back up top where he's going to race the engine. So there, but like in the drifters, they're they're really nervous about losing response, because they actually have these cars set up where there's a tremendous amount of grip available. I mean, the guys some guys I'm working for right now, they sent me pictures where the thing's picking the front tire up off the ground going in a turn. I mean, they're just shredding massive drag radials in a session of drifting, where they want that as much response as possible to dig that thing out of the corner. It's not like drifting on 195/50s anymore. These guys are making some power and putting some power down, and they want that response. So they're a little bit light on the cam compared to the average dyno racer or drag racer because they want the low speed response.
Hey Jay, I saw recently. Did you do that latest 2J for Adam down in Florida?
Yeah, yeah. I've always I've not taken the drifter seriously uh, because it's judged and I like timed. And I think eventually they evolve into some level. Imagine if you show up to Formula Drift and there's a one lap session where the dudes go out and they put a lap together for their car. Um, I'm interested in that, but yeah, I've been having a lot of fun with those guys. The young man that tunes for them, he's a lot of fun to deal with. His name is Freddie, and they have this facility where they can play at work. So that blows my mind to have the opportunity to just go make some rips at lunch or something. I mean, the facility that LZ and his crew landed is really really cool.
So Adam is Team Skunk2. Adam's actually a really good friend of mine. I used to tune the E36 and go down there and help tune a bunch of the cars in there. Freddie took over. He's a lot closer. It's a lot easier, but uh, we've been supporting him with some of the K series stuff that he's doing in that S13. And then I know him from here in Connecticut. I tuned his R32, his R34, and the Evo 5 that he actually has is one of my prized. I love that car. It was a
Yeah,
AM.
I've seen that car. He just finished up this S15, and it's a yellow S15, and man, it just really catches my eye. So it's cool because I get to go over there and um, see a bunch of action that isn't really commonplace for me.
And he's smart. Adam is he asks questions and he'll do his research. And
Yeah,
it's easier working with guys like that who give you genuine feedback and give you honest feedback, and he can actually go out there and make a couple laps around the compound and come back and say, hey, I'm a bit laggy here, I need this here. And it just makes it a lot easier to do the things we do.
yeah. No, I think he's a special young dude for sure.
The Asian Picasso.
Well, I mean,
I
I think
know
it's easier to see it this way.
he sent this to me about 100 times. And Jay, it's actually now that I'm seeing this, it brought up a discussion point that Dave and I were talking about. That kind of rolls into this. So looking at this, Jay, we were trying to figure out, looking at injection timing and closing events with injection timing, and looking at what is duty cycle and how can you calculate injection open or injector open when all you have is the injector closed. So looking at 720 degrees of rotation, and let's just say at 10,000 RPM, I'm at 80% duty cycle, and I know that the injector closes 400 degrees before top dead center. Where does the injector open? And these are some of the things that we've been dabbling with and trying to find the answers to. And I think we found the answer to it, but I've been meaning to reach out to you to see if you know what your take on that is.
Can you get enough? Um, can you get enough injector size in it to make a difference? Because you want to control the injection time the best you can. Well, there's two camps to this. Pro stock had a real hard time matching a carburetor, and that was pro stock, right? So when they went to fuel injection, they all lost power, and the further they moved the injector from the um, from the valve, the better things got for them. And some guys got caught cheating by injecting fuel into the hood scoop, and then that changed the rules to where all fuel must enter through the port injector. So if the pinnacle of naturally aspirated um, racing had a hard time matching uh, wet flow, uncontrolled wet flow, and I know there's a huge um, atomization in how homogeneous the mixture is with a carburetor versus a port injector. Maybe to your personal thing with your NA engine, a shower injector would be worth exploring rather than messing with the port timing um, if the injector is close to the valve. Do you have shower injectors on your car?
I haven't. We've been playing with them. The problem is it's the amount of space that we have relative to the front of the car, the airbox, and a lot of the things. Naturally, the closer you move that injector to the bell mouth, the more the flow suffers to the back of that valve. So we've had issues of losing power with the shower head if the injector is actually too close to the bell mouth.
Because you're eating up airspace.
Correct. In an
And
ideal
you
world,
wonder because Formula One in its naturally aspirated heyday, they had those shower injectors really far away from the butterfly.
again, looking at these four strokes here, just it sparked that thought again of everyone talks duty cycle, but the industry, I don't know if they really understand what duty cycle actually is and what it's defining as, you know, how much injector you have left, but what's actually happening through those four strokes. Like at 100% injector duty cycle, the injector is actually staying open through 99% of the four strokes in that equation.
Right. Well, you have what is it, 20 milliseconds at 6,000 and 13 milliseconds at 7,000.
Yeah.
By the time you're at 10,000, you don't have a lot of time to have an optimized injection period unless you have a really big nozzle.
One of the things that I say is like everybody's chasing leaks in their engine. Like we'll get somebody call up, oh, your throttle body leaks, and it's like a pinhole in a balloon. It like barely leaks or whatever, and they're thinking it's going to have this huge impact. The biggest leak in your engine is the camshaft.